Hi, this is Trista from Co-operatives First. The following webinar was recorded on September 23rd, 2021 on the topic of Indigenous agriculture. I was joined by Jesse Robson, Program Manager, Indigenous Relations at Farm Credit Canada. I would like to thank Jesse for sharing his knowledge of opportunities for First Nations in agriculture. Jesse highlighted how First Nations business and communities are in a position to find success in this industry and how FCC is there to meet their needs and find their potential. The discussion concluded with a presentation from myself discussing how the co-op model has been used in various agriculture projects. If you have any questions about this webinar or any of our upcoming webinars, please feel free to email me at trista@cooperativesfirst.com. If you're interested in attending one of our future discussions, please visit yourwaytogether.ca/webinars to sign up. I hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you, and until next time.
Okay, so today we have Jesse Robson from Farm Credit Canada joining the presentation. So as an Anishinaabe graduate of the First Nations University of Canada, Jesse started with Farm Credit Canada in 2010. Since then, Jesse has roles on the FCC creative writing team, communications, and human resources before joining the Indigenous Relations as program manager. In 2020, Jesse began compiling research to write and submit a paper for the Journal of Economic Development, which was published in February 2021. So today you'll hear key learnings from that paper from his experience at FCC throughout his presentation. So welcome, Jesse.
Thank you very much, Trista. So yeah, my name is Jesse. I work on the Indigenous Relations team at FCC, Farm Credit Canada. And the team is relatively new. We just were established at the beginning of 2020. But as I deliver this presentation, I'll be using the term Indigenous, referring to all Indigenous groups in Canada, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, but the focus of much of the content is on First Nations. And so I'll use those terms, strategically as needed. And we'll be showing you some of what we've been sharing with other Indigenous leaders, business owners, and operators across industry and associations. And I hope this just gives you some perspective from the point of view of some of our First Nations customers, some of our prospects, and some of what FCC has been up to here. And now, no, where am I? Am I sharing the screen properly? I always have to double check that.
We can now see our presentation.
Okay, and now you see just the slide, no notes. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll start out the presentation in a good way. Ambawashte, Nakoni Abamagi Abi Hohega Yuza. Good day. In Nakota, they call me carries the prayer cloth. My name is Jesse Robson, and I've been at FCC for 11 years. Right now, I am on the Indigenous Relations team as a program manager. My father was Anishinaabe. My mother was German, but I married a Cree Nakota woman, and I was given my spirit name in the Nakota Sundance. So that's why I introduced myself that way. And while today's session is being delivered virtually, wherever we find ourselves today in Canada, we are on traditional Indigenous territories with rich traditions and stories and histories that should be understood and honored. I'm delivering this presentation from Regina, which is Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And FCC offices are spread out all across the country, covering all treaty areas, unceded and unsurrendered territories, and the traditional homelands of the Métis. That in the image right there is FCC headquarters on Hamilton Street in Regina. And all of this is possible thanks to the treaties, and we are reminded that we are all treaty people. And I take a moment to recognize that because FCC in agriculture using traditional Indigenous lands to create the industry that it is. And so we want to make sure that we acknowledge that every chance we get. And so As Trista mentioned, in 2020, the FCC team, Indigenous Relations team, began working on a research paper to submit to the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. We knew there was a lot of topics we needed to cover, and that meant a lot of research and networking, because as a corporation, FCC has a lot of information about ag and food, but the reality is there were a lot of details unique to Indigenous agriculture, specifically lending on reserve, and we wanted to make sure we got that information right. What we did know for sure was this: an industry like ag and food, where land is equal to wealth, First Nations communities are poised to use their land to succeed and become leaders in ag and food. But as of right now, there's a big gap in First Nations with great agricultural land and First Nations success in that industry. And so we just want Indigenous businesses to see that now is the time to take a good look at this industry. And we want FCC employees to see that Indigenous customers and prospects have tremendous potential to grow. And so this is the journal, the Aboriginal Economic Development, and the article that was published in February 2021. Now, the main message that we wanted to communicate was opportunity for First Nations in agriculture. First Nations businesses and communities are in a position to find significant success in the industry. And at FCC, we've been doing a lot of legwork to meet that demand and potential. And I just want to jump quickly to in the late summer of 2020, our team began work with Stone Olofsson to create a survey that could yield us some information on Indigenous agriculture throughout Canada. And so among those surveyed were a mix of community members, band councillors, individual producers, as well as third-party stakeholders, all of which were involved in Indigenous ag in some way. And I want to take a quick look at some of the results because right off the bat, barriers to entering the ag and food industry, those top four are right there: access to capital, access to equipment, access to skilled labor, and access to agricultural knowledge and skills. And so I'll look at those bottom two because I think those first two, access to capital, access to equipment, that's kind of for us to worry about at FCC. But the access to skilled labor, I just want to show some of the positions that were highlighted in order to maintain a farm or food business from the respondents of that survey. You look at the economic development officer, labor positions, land band managers, skilled labor, financial officers, farm managers. So success in agriculture for a First Nation requires a lot of supporting roles. And I think we have farm manager down there at 40%, but that's a big one that really every farm, every food business is going to need. And another one of the barriers that was in that top four was access to agricultural knowledge. And so we asked a simple question: how likely are you to engage with training opportunities? And 89% of respondents said very likely or likely to engage with training opportunities. So that showed us, people are hungry to learn and we need to meet that demand. And throughout the survey, there was a theme of supporting youth. And we see here in the respondents, 92% chose youth ag opportunities for where they want to see FCC support. So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to how can we create content geared towards youth in ag and food. The reality is, in a lot of non-Indigenous farms, they are family run. And what that means is agricultural knowledge gets passed down from generation to generation. And within that community, that knowledge grows and grows with each generation. With Indigenous youth, due to legislation, Indian Act, and a number of other things, Indigenous people were systematically and through legislation kind of removed or given many challenges in order to succeed in the agriculture industry. And so in looking to try to get some of that success back and try to get back some of that traction for Indigenous people in Canada, we have to be able to bring people to the same level of knowledge that a family farm has had that kept that knowledge in their family for generations. And that also speaks to the skilled labor. When a family farm has calving season and you need somebody in that barn, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they can rotate out family members. For a farm on reserve that has employees, it's a little bit different to try to schedule in a 24-hour cycle of employees being ready there for calving season. So that's some of the unique challenges facing Indigenous agriculture. But the opportunity is there, and of our respondents, we saw 73% say their community or First Nation plans on increasing their participation in agriculture over the next 5 years. That includes new equipment, increased seeded acres or crop variation, increased herds and livestock, and so on and so forth. That opportunity in ag and food, it's a $49 billion industry, and so it contributes $49 billion to Canada's gross domestic product, and that's split pretty much down the middle, with $25.1 billion being agriculture, $23.9 billion being food, so food production and creating products. Throughout that Stone Olson survey, we noticed a theme about food sovereignty and food security for the community, as opposed to simply making a profit. And we know that a well-built food system can benefit the entire community. So knowing that, I just want to highlight the Quapaw tribe in the United States. They took a long-term approach to regaining their own food sovereignty. And regaining, I say, because Indigenous people had food sovereignty long ago. And this is an example of, even though it's from the United States, it shows elements of vertical integration or a circular economy that a First Nation community in Canada can aspire to, or can take parts, the best parts that work for them. And so for the sake of time, this will be a pretty quick overview, but as we go through this, I think as we go through this, some of your own experience in your own roles will help fill in some of the gaps. So the Quapaw, they started small by purchasing 5 head of bison. And from there, they saw an opportunity to grow and partner with their tribe's casino restaurant to provide bison meat. Hypothetically, that could be a relationship with any nearby business. But once that relationship started to show some success, they got into cattle ranching as well. And with the bison and the casino restaurant relationship working well, the Quapaw began looking at what else they could do with that same model. They were using a lot of vegetables, all from outside the community. So that meant there was an opportunity. In order to meet that demand and supply vegetables year round, they needed to go into greenhouses. So leadership went into the process of securing financing, building greenhouses, and they began growing fresh vegetables. The same thing with honey, using a lot of honey. They could meet that demand, so they went into beekeeping. And they, again, coffee, everybody loves coffee, and they were using a lot of it. So they ended up buying some coffee processing, some roasters, and they imported the coffee beans, but then created their own coffee product that they could create and distribute. And that creates the circular economy where what they're supplying is what their community is consuming. Once they had gained experience in all of these food areas, they saw another opportunity. This is a photo of their black cattle and Angus ranch. In order to provide their community with its own beef or bison meat, the Quapaw needed to have the cattle slaughtered and processed outside of their community. They had to ship the livestock to Colorado, then to Missouri, then bring it back home. And so this was a huge learning curve. So having cattle isn't necessarily that close to food sovereignty. It's really just one step away from not having cattle. And so I think the message here is, can we prepare those looking to enter into ranching or expand their ranching for some of the lessons the Quapaw had learned on their own? So to truly own their food system, the Quapaw needed to own their own meat processing plant. This is a huge challenge, and Quapaw leadership had to work with the federal government in order to make sure they were following all the guidelines and getting the right licenses and everything like that. But it was essential to their food sovereignty or their circular economy. But it was important because it meant being able to raise cattle, process the cattle, supply the meat without it ever leaving their community. And obviously this creates more permanent jobs, allows the meat to stay in their community, and creates a sense of pride, and it's true vertical integration or circular economy of their beef and bison industry. Now, something like this would look different for each community, but it serves as a great example of how an Indigenous nation has reclaimed their own food sovereignty. At FCC, we saw an opportunity to expand our eligibility in lending. And so those nations without large land bases or in forest-heavy areas, they may find opportunities in fishing, forestry, non-timber forest products, and the agri-food and agribusiness value chain. What does that mean exactly, the agri-food and agribusiness value chain? There's one example of a family farm finding, this was a non-Indigenous family farm, finding wild blueberries on their property. And they first began to harvest these blueberries and sell them just as extra income. But that gave them an extra 4 to 6 week window of sales. So 4 to 6 weeks windows, you know, it's not that long. It doesn't add a whole lot of extra profit. And so they began thinking of how can they increase the value? How can they add value to that food? And so their idea was turn those wild blueberries into a juice. So they successfully created this juice brand. They hit the stores with it. And within about a year, they were able to turn that 4 to 6 week window into a year-round national brand. And that just shows how you can add value to your product by creating a food product instead of just selling the food. I mentioned about expanding our lending eligibility at FCC. So we wanted to show Indigenous business owners in Canada that we understand their opportunities. So we wanted to be open to lend into traditional Indigenous harvesting from natural resources, including gathering or collecting and taking advantage of you being able to take advantage of your opportunities. So FCC, as of April 1st, this year, we now finance wild rice, wild mushrooms, pine tree sap, wild berries, fireweed, various herbs and spices, and freshwater wild fish. And so that would be a good opportunity for those who aren't necessarily in an area where the crops or the land is conducive to the more well-known sectors of agriculture. We also wanted to show Indigenous business owners in Canada that we understand the challenges, and the biggest challenge that we've identified is really the Indian Act. And so I'm going to speak to some of the barriers here in the Indian Act and ways that we can try to mitigate those barriers. One option to mitigating the barriers is the First Nations Land Management Act and the Framework Agreement on First Nations Land Management. Now, I am no expert on this by any means, but what the Framework Agreement allows is for an opt-out of 44 sections of the Indian Act related to land management, and allows the nation to develop their own laws about land use, environment, and natural resources. Some First Nations, like Dakota Whitecap here in Saskatchewan, they've seen a lot of success as a result of having their own land code. And I highlight this because agriculture and food businesses require structures. And it's that loan for structures that financial institutions like FCC have the most difficulty approving for on reserve land. So the Framework Agreement can make things easier for us at FCC to lend. And obviously we want our lending process to be as easy as possible for the customers. In that journal article that I mentioned, and in the presentations I've given, I've made the information as easy as possible to understand, because honestly, all of this, can be very intimidating. Typically, this is the types of financing required for an ag or food business. And of these, as I said, it's that loan for structures that create the most challenges when securing financing. But equipment financing also has some challenges worth noting, and it was highlighted as one of the barriers is access to equipment. There's two distinctions important to equipment financing on reserve. And it evolves around taking the equipment as collateral to secure the financing. So sales through a dealership use a conditional sales contract and a band council resolution. This allows us to more easily lend because the conditional sales contract supersedes Section 89 of the Indian Act. And this means that we can use the value of the equipment to lend, the value of the equipment as collateral. That second distinction is private equipment financing does not include a conditional sales contract component, and therefore Section 89 is applicable, which means we aren't able to use that equipment as collateral. And so private sales don't necessarily, we can't help finance that on reserve land, but dealership with conditional sales contract and band council resolutions, we can. And on that note, having the latest tech is nice, but not necessary. This is a picture from Cowessess First Nations, where they started really small with their operation and they're starting to grow each year. And as they're ready to grow, they're able to create more, update their equipment as they are ready. So start small, plan effectively, and grow the farm slowly. So that's what we've been sharing about equipment financing, but looking at structures that reside on reserve land, those can primarily be financed if it has become designated land. A First Nation can get designated land through a change in the land code using that framework agreement and the First Nations Land Management Act, or they can literally surrender the land to the Crown, but that takes years of work and a referendum, and it's not ideal. So one thing we really want to explore in our research paper, and as we talk with other nations, is the option for financing fee simple land. This is another slide showing our research with Stone Olives, and you'll see that purchasing land is the top option here at 43%. So before purchasing land for agricultural use, we're encouraging communities to know their options. When a First Nation buys land, there are two options: convert the land to reserve status using the additions to reserve process, or do not convert the land to reserve status. That makes it fee simple land. Fee simple land is known, fee simple ownership is recognized in Canadian law as the most complete form of ownership. The Indian Act does not apply to fee simple land as it does to reserve land. For a financial institution like FCC, the focus is that fee simple land makes lending into that farm or food business a lot easier. But there are pros and cons that it's important each First Nation or business looks into first. For instance, with fee simple land, many of the protections under the Indian Act will not apply, such as the statutory limits on seizure, attachment, or the taxation of reserve land. Speaking of taxes, farming is in a much way a tax game, and successful producers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, take advantages of all the tax write-offs, and it should be no different for First Nations entering into agriculture. The First Nations tax exemption is a huge advantage in ag and food. It can save thousands of dollars on inputs or structures or equipment. And one of the things at FCC that we're building into our lending plan is ensuring that if the business is on reserve, that we're taking into account the tax-free treaty rights held by an individual. Basically, that means any income that we're looking at to lend, most banks will look at that using the Canadian tax model, which means they're presuming that all those taxes are included in that. At FCC, we're looking at that tax-free. So what that does is that looking at the tax-free income increases the dollars that a nation has. And so if we were to assume that that nation is paying taxes on all their tax-free land, that decreases the dollars. So it gives you more value is what we're saying, and ensuring that the treaty rights are being honored there. Now, building a farming operation where a First Nation business is operating on both fee simple and reserve land, that creates an opportunity to leverage all the advantages and make the most of your land. And that's a significant competitive advantage to the community. But it also takes a detailed level of planning for each community, because each community and nation is different. While some nations are already doing this, others are just getting started or looking to get started. So this brings me back to the first point I made, and I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly here. But agricultural land is equal to wealth, and First Nations have the land. They have the drive to be leaders in this industry. It's not easy to just jump into an industry, which is why knowledge is so important. And for those who are finding success in the industry, they're leaning on that knowledge. So that's a big part of what we do here, creating knowledge to ensure Indigenous nations are ready to jump in and have the answers that they need. But it's not just knowledge, it's also traditional knowledge. So before the pandemic, I had a chance to travel to meet FCC customers on the Thunderchild First Nation. And one of the people I had the privilege to meet was a man named Joseph Jimmy. And sadly, he has since passed away, but his family assured us that they wanted his words to live on, and they gave us permission to use his image words going forward. So Mr. Jimmy spent a lot of his younger adult years working on farms, and he often provided advice and encouragement, guidance to the crew at Thunder Farms. And I want to share something he said to us about First Nations youth in Canada. Our younger generation that are going to school now, some of them should go into agriculture. No, not only teaching, social work, recreation, not only those things, but also agriculture. And to me, that really speaks to the wisdom and the traditional knowledge, because that focus on the youth, it's something that was highlighted throughout all of our respondents in that Stone Olafson research. And it's something that Elder Jimmy here was able to share with us as well. And it's something that FCC had been saying to its non-Indigenous customers for years about going into agricultural colleges and the opportunity that's available and being able to fill that gap when that generation is ready to take on the farms. The last thing I want to mention about Thunder Farms is that they're owned and operated by the Thunderchild First Nation, but they have a business model that seems to be working well for them. The man on the right there, that's John Wozniak. He's the farm manager for Thunder Farms, but he's non-Indigenous. He's a semi-retired farmer from Alberta, but when they were establishing the farm, they wanted to hire an outside expert to help them start up. So John signed a 5-year contract, and his role is to manage the day-to-day operations of Thunder Farms and grow a successful crop to market each year. But another key part of his role was to find someone from Thunderchild First Nation to mentor him into his role. So once that 5 years is up, the person he's mentoring moves into farm manager, and that person is a Thunderchild First Nation member. So that's Derek Mitus. So as you see here, he says, my future goal is I'd like to continue on with Thunder Farms, go to that next level, step away from the actual combining and sitting in the tractor and take over the role of managing it. And so that's a great way that shows how they're able to take the existing knowledge from a non-Indigenous farm manager, hire him on, and train that next generation so the farm can be more sovereign and so that the band can really run it on their own. And to me, the Thunderchild was the reason I highlight it is because it's a crew of young guys. They're all from the community, and they're learning this type of knowledge, gaining this experience they would not have had a chance to get anywhere else. And you can tell they're excited about it. They're happy to be there. They show up for work every day, and they love it. It's not without its own challenges, but it's definitely something that I think a lot of First Nations are looking to aspire towards. And so that's why I highlight them. And so the last thing I'll say is that path to success in ag and food, it's there for First Nations communities. There are barriers, but there are ways to mitigate those barriers. Some nations are better set up to do this than others. And the reality is this is going to take a concentrated effort from financial institutions like FCC to deliberately encourage the success of Indigenous ag in the ag and food industry. And there's a lot of values that are similar to farming and food values that are very similar to the traditional values that we're seeing across the board for First Nations that we're talking to. And so that ends my presentation today. Let me just go back into that to stop sharing the screen. I don't know how to stop sharing the screen. There we go.
Well, thank you very much, Jesse. That was a lot of great information and very valuable. I was very inspired in reading your article in the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. So yeah, thank you very much for speaking to all of our participants today. So from now, I'll do a short presentation just to talk about some examples of Indigenous agriculture cooperatives. And after my presentation, we will go into like question and answers, and then we'll go on with our discussion question. And so I will share my screen as well. For people who are unfamiliar, I just kind of quickly highlight what is a co-op. So a co-op is a business run by a group of people with similar interests who make decisions together and share in the business profit. In Western Canada, a co-op is created by a group of 3 or more. However, in Saskatchewan, 6 individuals are required. It is legally incorporated and can be either set up as a for-profit or nonprofit organization. And co-ops operate in almost every sector of the economy. Although cooperatives are like a lot of other businesses, especially corporations, they do have 2 key features that make them different. So all members, they are the owners and they have the same amount of decision-making power as everyone else. So it's the one member, one vote. And co-ops give their profits back to their members based on how much the members use the business, not how much they've invested in it. So distribution of profit or surplus is any money left over after the business is paid for everything it needs to function. So rent, wages, inventory, etc. Cooperatives, they are businesses like any other, create revenue and aim to make profit. But what they do with the profit is a bit different. So instead of the surplus going to shareholders based on how much of the company they own, it can be distributed back to the members based on how much they've used it in that year. So some of the benefits of cooperatives are they have the opportunity to be structured with more community involvement for members to actually see the benefits of the co-op to the membership. And it is very transparent of how much profit the members are getting and receiving and how the profits are being used because the members are the owners. Education and training has been a very high priority in a lot of co-ops that we've talked to. And getting youth involved and including that into the structure have also been included into like the values of the co-op. So not only can including into the operational, teaching the youth about the co-op operational activities like the financial budgeting or those types of activities, but also incorporating traditional knowledge, whether or not it is planting or harvesting, those can be incorporated into keeping the youth involved. Speaking with existing cooperatives, one of the feedback that I have received and are some unintended benefits that co-ops have been receiving that they didn't expect when they started. Safety has been one. So this is usually having like a storefront or a central location instead of having strangers coming into their homes for like purchasing items. So having like a central location and sharing it with other members. Competitors becoming allies and working together. So working on projects or large scale projects, members will build up that camaraderie and reduce the amount of undercutting or undervaluing their products to sell to the market. And also education and learning new techniques. With working together, members are actually able to learn from each other and teach each other and use traditional techniques and learn new technologies to make things more efficient and working together. So in this next section, I'll just highlight three cooperatives that within Indigenous communities. They have really interesting stories, and so I'm just going to do a quick highlight. And if you have any further questions, we can discuss them later, or reach out to me and like we can discuss further. So the first one is River Select, and so the owners of the cooperative are 8 independent fisheries throughout BC. So each fishery is comprised of the First Nations harvester and fishermen. So the fishermen selectively harvest the best salmon for River Select, and they also respect and conserve the natural environment with the selective fishing and quality control. Fishermen supply the fish to the local fishery, which is the cooperative, and it's the duty of the cooperative to market the salmon using shared administration with marketing, sales, and branding. And the cooperative also creates sales channels to sell the salmon globally. So in addition to like selling just frozen salmon, the cooperative and the fisheries turn the fish into new products to sell it to consumers in a variety of ways. And the co-op has a formal arrangement with the leadership, the First Nations leadership, and to place a high value on like salmon conservation and sustainable fishing for generations to come. The next example I will highlight is called the Res Chick Fresh Eggs Cooperative. This is a U.S. Cooperative in the Umatilla Reservation in Pendleton, Oregon. So it is 4 women that purchased 28 chicks in April of 2020 for food sovereignty. So in addition to purchasing these chicks, they also like planted gardens. They came up with this idea because they went to the local grocery store at the beginning of the pandemic, and their local market was actually out of food. So they needed a way to feed their families. So once they began raising these chicks and getting eggs, they weren't certified, and so eggs were just given to friends and family for consumption. They did work with, in March of 2021, they incorporated with the state of Oregon. It's very similar structure because they couldn't, their tribe did not have a way to incorporate within the tribe. They had been incorporated with the state. And then since then, they've worked with the USDA Rural Development to be certified for sales. And it helped with labeling, advertising, insurance, refrigeration. They have also partnered with the local high school to get the high school students to learn about the administration and the business side of the co-op, and as well as raising the chicks and within the hatchery. So they also supply the local cafes and markets for sales. And so now the co-op supplies the local cafe, including the tribal casino, with eggs. And they can do this at a lower price than the competitors due to their reusable egg crates that they supply the eggs to the market. And because they're not paying for these egg crates, they are returned and they actually pass the savings on to the consumers. So everybody wins then, and they don't create all this waste. So the co-op is independent from their tribe. They bought these chicks on their own, and so they are independent. But however, With the pandemic, the tribe does give out food rations to their tribal members. So the Reshchik cooperative supplies the tribe with eggs to give out for the food rations for the rest of the community. So the final co-op that I will highlight today is I want to is one of our favorites because it is our first cooperative that we project that we worked on, and it is the Food Forest and Learning Center Co-op. So the Food Forest wasn't recently incorporated in the community of Viscount, southeast of Saskatoon. Its origins, however, began over 17 years ago in the mine of Maggie Blue Waters. The Food Forest is a 50-acre parcel of land south of Viscount at Manitou Lake, and this was the inspiration for Blue Waters' original vision. A pristine piece of lakeside land, which the natural foods and herbs of the prairies can be gathered. The Learning Center has been established in an old church in Viscount, purchased from the bishop 7 years ago for a nominal price and the promise to use it for the good of the people. The church and its yard is now home to school classes, gardening workshops, and other events. It also has a loft living area that can temporarily house families in distress. The organization's name stems from the fact that it is a natural orchard of native plants. So there's sweetgrass, every kind of sage, rose hips, juneberries, gooseberries, king cherries, chokecherries, wild raspberries. So it's a haven of food, said Blue Waters. It's like a literal food forest. So on this now restored land, the cooperative plans to build healing bathhouses for elders and people with ailments where they can benefit from the surrounding environment on the lake. The group also envisions a gathering place where educational nature walks can take place. So the co-op is made up of 3 generations of women from 2 Indigenous families, and they form the co-op board. So it's Blue Waters, her daughter and granddaughter, as well as 3 generations from another family, which Blue Waters refers to as a powerful pack of women. So between all of them, they have backgrounds in education, healthcare, social work, and as well as knowledge in traditional ceremonies. So that is the end of my presentation. So we do have time to have some Q&As. And we do have a discussion question, but if depending on the time, we might just have a kind of a roundtable question. So are there any questions for myself or Jesse or anything anybody would like to discuss?
I guess I have a question for Jesse. Thanks for your presentation, Jesse. I took quite a few notes. It's pretty new to me. We're in British Columbia, and I think that the topography and the land and everything lends itself to a different type of farming. And mostly what I've been involved with is community farms, we call them, many of them cooperatives that are much smaller scale than what you're talking about, but very, very diverse in terms of the products that we produce and we sell. And so I have a question, mainly coming from being a new cooperative called Foodlands Cooperative that did last year do a deep dive into decolonization. And first we thought as a cooperative, we needed to figure out like how we would govern ourselves in relationship to the land that we occupying, which is basically, we agree, is stolen. So that's taking us down a very long journey. And one of the questions I have is that, do we have examples of either settler cooperatives supporting Indigenous cooperatives to get started, like a co-ops amongst co-ops? Are there examples of Indigenous people having, cultural contracts or whatever that some other countries have that would allow them free access to our community farms that are cooperatively run or owned? So we're looking for what kind of a relationship can we have? And also, do you know of Indigenous people who have, what do you call, eligible status that would allow us to give back land to Indigenous people so that they would be able to give a tax receipt to any, donations of land? I know that that's a lot of questions, and maybe we can talk outside the meeting, but those are the things we're pursuing. I can't hear you. What's happening here?
That was me. I was on mute. And
Oh,
so when
okay.
it comes to the contracts of cooperatives, that might be something that Trista might have a better answer for. So at FCC, we don't have any of that knowledge. But when it comes to some of the feedback we've heard from Indigenous farmers, that their non-Indigenous neighbors have been extremely welcoming in helping and giving advice, in some cases even lending equipment that they needed to help get the job done. And so from what we've seen, that level of partnership, there's big opportunity there. And I would encourage anybody to reach out to nearby farms, Indigenous or not, and see what type of business relationship could be developed there, because it is happening on some levels for sure. And so I would encourage more of that. But yeah, when it comes to those other questions you were asking, we don't have that information, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay. So as of right now, I'm unaware of the co-ops that have that type of structure of working together, but in a cooperative setting. But for other projects and businesses, there are great examples and of how both rural and Indigenous communities have come together on certain projects and working together. That is actually, it will be another webinar series that Cooperatives First will be hosting. We're actually in the planning stages. So in December, we will be having how municipal and rural organizations and groups can start partnerships with Indigenous communities. So if you would like to follow us on social media or newsletters, we will be advertising that later on this fall. So we will have examples, and we'll be hearing from the groups that have actually started these partnerships. So that is a great question, and yeah, we'll be hosting those webinars as well. Are there any other questions?
I will give a quick plug to our own website. You can go to fcc.ca/indigenous, and you can see our landing page there. We link to knowledge articles and different financing options and things. It's the knowledge section at FCC is something our team is really trying to focus on, creating a lot of content, because right now there's not a lot of content out there for specific to Indigenous agriculture. And as I mentioned, there's so many unique challenges and opportunities that it's something that we really need to fill that gap of opportunity for knowledge. So check out the FCC knowledge page and the Indigenous landing page, and we're always going to be updating that.
So unfortunately, we are running out of time today. So I want to thank everybody for attending. So we will be skipping the discussion questions. However, if you do have any follow-up questions or have any projects or just want to learn more about Cooperatives First and our services, feel free to reach out, give me a call. And I want to, once again, thank you all for attending.